State University.
Hello, I'm Clark Noble, and I'll be attending University of Arizona.
Hi, my name is Brenna Adams. I'll be attending New York University London.
Good afternoon, my name is Henry Ding, I'll be attending UNR. And our unit coach is Mr. Clark as well as our Greek people teacher.
It's the University of Nevada, Henry, not UNR. Come on.
Excuse me?
Be proud.
For 22 years, when I conducted voir dire, the selection of the jury for let's say every Monday morning that we had a child, there would be students or teachers that I go to UNR, or I'm a student at UNR, and I would say to them, no, it is the university.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, by the way, excuse me.
Yeah, your name.
My name is Steve Kosach.
And my name is Christina Pickering, and I am an alum of Reno High School. I graduated from here many years ago. But I have to say the territorial chauvinism that you're exhibiting with respect to the university system is
She lives in Las Vegas.
My name is Martha Gould, and I'm not a Nevada native. I went to the University of Michigan, and I didn't go to high school here. I went to high school back east.
Very well. Unit 4. And for those in the audience, the broad heading is, how have the values and principles embodied in the Constitution shaped American institutions and practices? What an incredibly broad question. But the specific question you all have this evening is number 2. And it starts with a quotation from Hoffer, Supreme Court, the concise Princeton Encyclopedia. The court has a role in the institutional politics of the nation. The members of the court are political players themselves, and the court's decisions can dramatically affect the nation's political fate. Do you disagree or agree with the opinion of that scholar? Why or why not? What evidence can you offer to support your position? And then more generally, in what ways does the system of checks and balances limit the power of the Supreme Court? Are additional checks and balances needed? Why or why not? And then next, no institution other than the Supreme Court is asked to explain itself through written opinions. What purposes do written opinions serve, and how important are they in democratic society? Please begin.
Former U.S. President William Howard Taft said in his book, Our Chief Magistrate and His Powers, presidents come and go, but the Supreme Court goes on forever. Over time, the courts have gained power through their decisions, setting precedents for future courts, whereas a president's policies primarily affect the time period of their administration. The Supreme Courts and lower courts have gradually shaped the nation's future through their political rulings, legislating from the bench and acting as political players to further their political views on the Constitution.
We agree with Professor Hoffer's statement that the court's decisions can dramatically affect the nation's political fate. The rulings in the cases of McCutcheon v. FEC and National Federation of Independent Business v. Sibelius reveal the political impacts that court rulings had on the nation. Last month, the Nevada Supreme Court affected the political fate of turned-out city council members, prohibiting them to run for mayor in the case of Lorton v. Reno City Clerk, opening the door for 20 candidates to fill the open vacancy.
Justice Joseph Story wrote in 1836, "The danger is that the judges will be ready to yield themselves to the passion, politics, and prejudices of the day." The word of Joseph Story can be seen with President Franklin Roosevelt, who tried to influence the courts to approve his New Deal programs by turning to Congress to back the courts in his favor. Under pressure, the courts began ruling in favor of the New Deal legislation, such as the case of West Coast Hotels v. Parrish, which upheld the constitutionality of the minimum wage law.
Congress can limit the oversight of the Supreme Court through jurisdiction stripping, limiting what the judicial branch can review in the legislative and executive branches. Despite the stripping of the Immigration Responsibility Act in 1996 to reduce the impact of the courts, the caseload of the U.S. Court of Appeals actually increased by 18%.
Congress can enact legislation or propose constitutional amendments to maneuver around the rulings of the Supreme Court. In U.S. v. Lopez, Congress rewrote the Gun-Free School Zones Act and added a provision to Title 18 of the United States Code stating that a firearm affects interstate commerce. The 11th, 13th, 14th, 16th, 19th, and 26th amendments have come as reactions to Supreme Court decisions. As reactions to the Supreme Court's ruling in Citizens United v. FEC, senators such as John Tester and Bernie Sanders have proposed constitutional amendments to effectively overturn the court's decision.
In Federalist 78, Alexander Hamilton wrote that the judiciary has no influence over either the sword or the purse, and can take no active resolution. It may truly be said to have neither force nor will. We agree with Alexander Hamilton and advocate that the Supreme Court does not need any additional checks or balances because of the court's ability to check itself. The court repealed the decision in the 1940 Minersville School District v. Govitis, which forced Jehovah's Witnesses to salute the flag at school, and was overturned 3 years later in West Virginia's State Board of Education v. Barnett through the dissenting opinion of Minersville because of the witnesses' right to free exercise of religion.
In a 2013 speech, Justice Anthony Kennedy stated, "We're the only branch of government that gives reasons for what we do." Written opinions are important to the functioning of a democratic society because they ensure that precedent is upheld and constantly administered in a court of law. Without stare decisis, courts would be able to establish rulings without upholding and reviewing prior precedents to rule on cases. William Blackstone used written opinions of the British Circuit Courts in his book Commentary on Law.
Historian Gordon Wood said, "I do not know of any country in the world where the judges wield as much power in shaping the contours of life as they do in the United States. Since John Roberts became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, 22% of cases heard by the Supreme Court have ended in 5 to 4 decisions, illustrating the division within our courts. However, through written opinions, judges can protect the minority and add to the functioning of a democratic society." Thank you.
Thank you very much. Judge Kosek, why don't you lead on?
Thank you, Chief. How is judicial review compatible with the Republican system?
Judicial review applies to the Republicanism view because in the Republic we elect officials who represent the will of the people. So even though we indirectly vote for our judicial branch, whether we by electing representatives or we live in states where we elect our own Supreme Court justices, such as in the state of Nevada, judicial review, by electing these judges, we have the review of the actions of the government, thereby reinforces this idea of republicanism.
Judicial review also is republicanism because it checks the legislative or executive branch by citing the Constitution and letting the judges be able to rule on the Constitution by their own means and constitutional views.
What constitutional provisions contribute to judicial independence, and conversely, what constitutional provision contributes, or I should say, threaten that independence?
Article 3, Section 2, Clause 1 of the Constitution says that the judicial power encompasses all cases that regard anything under the Constitution, U.S. laws, treaties, or regarding citizens or our states.
So an example of this would be the recent court decision with the United States v. Windsor, how it was a state issue going on, and the Supreme Court ruled in a 5-4 decision that they struck down the Defense of Marriage Act and they allowed the states for themselves to decide whether or not they should have gay marriage within their own states or not.
How and why is it that Supreme Court decisions are followed? They have neither the sword nor the purse. So what is it that allows them to be respected and to establish law and to resolve disputes?
Well, the Supreme Court can enforce their decisions through hearing a case again, or calling a case up again. In Brown v. Board of Education, they ruled to desegregate schools, and they learned that their sanctions on schools to desegregate them wasn't strict enough, so they called in Brown 2 to increase the sanctions against desegregation so they can enforce their court decision.
In Federal 78, Brutus stated that there's no power above the Supreme Courts to enforce its decisions. So I think that there is no power above them to actually check them and actually enforce their decisions that have been made.
Additionally, the justices on the Supreme Court write written opinions, and in some cases all of them do, such as in the case of Dred Scott v. Stanford, where all 9 of the justices actually wrote an opinion on the case because it was such a landmark decision.
The Supreme Court can make sure the decisions are being upheld by tossing them back to the states. So once again, to refer back to the United States v. Windsor example, the Supreme Court just simply threw it back to the states to decide for themselves. However, in another instance where we see the Supreme Court decision not being followed, would be Lancaster v. Georgia, where Andrew Jackson allegedly said, the Supreme Court has made the decision, now let's see them enforce it.
Should judges be independent of politics, and if so, why?
Professor Gherkin commented on the McCutcheon decision that we want our judges to be shielded by politics, but we don't want them to be naive about them. And you can see with the McCutcheon decision, it has potentially created it so that a small pool of elected members are essentially going to be deciding who is going to run for office. And I think this extremely political decision can show that judges should not be very political.
Justices should be political, but shy away from being partisan. So an example would be Justice Anthony Kennedy. He rules conservatively in some issues and on the liberal side on other issues. So it's important that they aren't defined by partisan lines, but they remain in tune with politics.
They should be isolated from politics because, as you can see in Bush v. Gore, they decided the president, and Justice Anthony Kennedy repeatedly said this is not a political decision, but it was because they decided the president and did not issue a recount before.
I think judges should be political in a sense that it allows the voters or the American public to have more or less a gauge as to where that Chief Justice or that justice would rule upon. But you can see judges not follow their political ideals with President Eisenhower, who elected Justice Buffett to the Supreme Court, where he thought that he would rule more conservative, but he went the opposite way.
I've been wanting to ask this for over 40 years, but I just don't know. What is the criteria to make up a landmark decision?
The criteria to make a landmark decision is something that would have societal impacts and something that would be able to change the political landscape of the nation. For me, it's Train v. City of New York, where they crossed out the line item veto with President Bill Clinton and made that unconstitutional, not able for a president to have that power anymore. And so my colleagues want to talk about it, so that's